Hello, everyone. This is Continent on the Air. My name is Igor Tsesarski. So today we have a meeting with a person who has not yet appeared on our channel, but I hope this is not his last time here. So allow me to introduce to you, gentlemen, Yuri Dedov-Goldman. Igor is a man who has already gained popularity in Israel thanks to his project. But to clarify for our special American audience who he is, he's a former captain of long-distance navigation and the originator of the idea to construct a navigable canal. And where, do you think? Yes, precisely, in Israel.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I am not spoiled by such things. I truly appreciate it.
Yes. So then, yes, it is not always possible to keep track of everything happening in your wonderful country, although we cover events in Israel extensively, but mainly political ones. As for various projects, especially those related to scientific or technical matters, we rarely feature them. But now we have an opportunity to speak not so much about the 12-day war with Iran, nor only about the situation in Gaza. Our political experts will report on those. And you have something different for us, a project that looks like a global one, the situation in Gaza. Our political experts will report on those. And you have something different for us, a project that looks like a global one. And here are a few words about it right from the start. I will not tell the story. You will tell it better yourself, as it is your brainchild.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I must say that when I arrived in Israel in 1999, it immediately caught my eye. There truly was a sense of divine sign here. Nothing is here. Nothing is extracted, nothing is happening. And when I stepped onto the seashore and cast my eyes over this magnificent blue expanse, I, as a former captain of long-distance navigation, was suddenly struck. But where are the ships? That is where it all began. That's where it all began. I started taking an interest. I began writing. There was a website called Mere World. I wrote an article there stating that all the riches of Israel are hidden out there, in the sea, in that beautiful blue sea. I had worked on many types of ships. I once began with fishing vessels, then worked on bulk carriers, on tugboats, worked on all kinds of ships, even on tankers, yes. I even once ferried a passenger ship. So I am a captain with the kind of experience that very few people have. And for me, all these calculations, well, I also received an economics degree from the Institute of Water Transport. I calculate very quickly, and very quickly identify where the weak point is. So that weak point turned out to be the empty sea in Israel, in a country of botanists, where practically everyone has a higher education. And yet there are no ships? That's right. And so began my visits to the Knesset. I started pestering some representatives of the people. Eventually, the first project appeared, high-speed maritime passenger transportation. I even got it approved by the Ministry of Transport. I just couldn't find financing. But then I thought, wait, all of this, these are just small transportation projects. But there's a mystery hidden here. After all, the Lord did not command this land to us for nothing, as if to say, Jews, think, 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 think. That's where it all began. I started taking an interest. I began writing. There was a website called Mere World. I wrote an article there stating that all the riches of Israel are hidden out there, in the sea, in that beautiful blue sea. I had worked on many types of ships. I once began with fishing vessels, then worked on bulk carriers, on tugboats, worked on all kinds of ships, even on tankers, yes. And then one day, while listening to a broadcast on Radio Rika about Theodore Herzl's book, The Promised Land, a phrase of his was quoted, "And caravans will travel through the Negev desert, but not of camels, of ships." Eureka! I said to myself, so that's it. I rushed to the bookstore to find a geographic map. I found one that seemed to me good, high quality, and I began to study it, to measure elevations. 2 months later, a fully calculated idea for a navigable canal project was born. We understand that it was not yet a full-fledged project, but it was an idea, with some reasonably detailed figures. And so the movement began. I started approaching politicians. People listen, no one sees it, but we have elevation. At that time, I calculated from this old map, subtracting an elevation of 550 meters, and finally a scientific council was convened. Even in that preliminary form, the scientists accepted the project and accepted it with enthusiasm. I kept writing, knocking, for 25 years. According to those calculations, the amount of soil to be removed was enormous. The total cost came out to around $350 billion. And then one day, while listening to a broadcast on Radio Rika about Theodor Herzl's book, The Promised Land, a phrase of his was quoted, "And caravans will travel through the Negev desert, but not of camels, of ships." Eureka! I said to myself,
That's all?
yes, and even so, many scientists acknowledge that it is quite realistic because, well, this is not an unreasonable price for a project like this. You see, what sets it apart from the existing Suez Canal? Today, the maximum width of the Suez Canal is about 350 meters. Well, there are places where it's 500, but that's just in some spots. Yes, you're showing an image of it now. They've already renovated, modified, and rebuilt it, so to speak. Initially, the Egyptians, like children in a sandbox, dug a second channel through that sand. As a result, we now have two channels, each 13 meters deep, in sand. And as you understand, the water washes through it and the sand settles to the bottom of the canal, and no dredging work helps. You can see here a line of ships engaged in removing sand from the canal bed, but it doesn't solve the problem. It's silting up. If in 150 years they haven't managed to do anything, haven't invented any kind of waterproofing, haven't reinforced the canal bed in any way, then we no longer need to pay attention to them. We will build our own canal. Knowing from the start what tonnage cannot pass through the Suez Canal, designed for such ships, with a displacement of 200,000 tons and more, up to infinity. And by infinity, I mean ships with a draft of up to 25 meters. The deepest draft of the largest ships is 25 meters. We will build a canal with a depth of 30 meters so that we have a 5-meter clearance under the keel and a width of no less than 500 meters. Because we are our own masters, we have the most modern equipment at our disposal. Tunnel boring machines, the latest excavators. I believe there will even be fierce competition among kablans, contractors, for the opportunity to take part in this construction. Yes, and even so, many scientists acknowledge that it is quite realistic because, well, this is not an unreasonable price for a project like this.
So, you're saying no such alternative is currently being considered?
This terrible, disgraceful incident is a vivid confirmation of what the Suez Canal has turned into. I must explain, as a captain of long-distance navigation, when you have a shallow canal and the draft of the ship nearly equals the canal's depth, somewhere around 1 meter of clearance, right in the middle of the canal, along the fairway, you end up with about a meter under the keel. What happens between the hull of the ship and the canal bed is the creation of a low-pressure zone, reduced pressure, and the ship's hull starts to be pulled downward toward the canal floor. The higher the speed, the more it sinks, settles. The closer it gets to one of the canal banks, the more it's also sucked toward it, because between the side of the ship and the edge of the canal, a similar low-pressure zone forms, and it begins to pull the ship sideways. That poor, massive vessel, this is exactly what happened to it. A gust of wind blew, or maybe the helmsman nudged the rudder a little. It turned slightly, and it immediately got sucked in and twisted. The ship became unmanageable. It has enormous mass, enormous weight, and the rudder blades simply couldn't handle it. It was turned sideways, and it ran aground, both bow and stern. It silted up and blocked the canal for a week or more. I don't even remember exactly. So that Ever Given, without any Houthis, managed to stop the Suez Canal. No Houthis needed. Such large ships simply should not be navigating such a shallow canal. We are going to build not just something different, but something fantastically different compared to the Suez Canal. Ours will have a minimum width of 500 meters and a depth of 30 meters. Moreover, with a surface width of 500 meters, the bottom width will be 350 meters. Then there are the slopes, of course. But that's only where we are really counting every penny, where the construction is particularly challenging. In other areas, we can widen it even to 1 kilometer, if we can create a proper marine water spread. In other words, through this canal, without any competition, Ships from all over the world will start sailing. They won't need to take the detour. You have a map showing the route around Africa. They won't need to make that enormous journey. Although among seafarers, we traditionally speak in miles. Many thousands of miles to go around Africa. It's outrageous. We'll divert all that flow of ships to ourselves. If the Suez Canal today is capable of handling up to 100 ships per day in its best times, ours will handle up to 320. Many thousands of miles to go around Africa. It's outrageous. We'll divert all that flow of ships to ourselves. If the Suez Canal today is capable of handling up to 100 ships per day in its best times, ours will handle up to 320. Yes, and here's the map, showing in red the forbidden color, the route taken by ships that go around Africa. But that makes no sense. It's a wild loss of money. We're talking billions into thin air, simply billions. And you can see how much the route is shortened, shown in blue, when ships travel through the Israeli Navigable Canal. Well, today it's through the Suez Canal. Yes, the one that doesn't exist yet, but which possibly will. No, which will definitely exist. I believe in that deeply. Because truly, to keep losing that kind of money, you'd have to be completely incapable of using your head.
Yes, Yuri, a quick question right away. You mentioned a figure. Well, yes, of course, it's a funny number. 350 billion. I'm being ironic, you understand.
That figure is outdated. I didn't finish explaining. I redid all the calculations after the interview with Sergei Slender aired. In addition to the various comments that followed, there were 3 excellent ones that pointed out an error in my earlier calculations when I was removing soil to create a depth of 50 meters. Back when I did the initial estimates, I made some other mistakes too. For example, I had even planned to dump the excavated soil into the Mediterranean Sea, which would have created an additional 1,500 square kilometers of territory for the country. Then someone said to me, "Why do you need a depth of 50 meters when the maximum draft of modern ships is 25 meters?" I had been sure it was 35 because there once was a tanker, the Globtic Tokyo, that had over 30 meters of draft. So I began to research and discovered that ships like that have been scrapped. They no longer exist. The largest ships today have a maximum draft of 25 meters. So why dig 50 meters when 5 meters under the keel is quite sufficient? And once I reduced the excavation depth for the canal bed, all the costs dropped sharply. And in several other parameters too, the costs came down. As a result, I arrived at figures. You won't believe it. If you like 350, we're now within budget, even with a railway running along the canal. And we absolutely will build one, because we won't be able to remove the soil using only conveyor belts. You're showing a great illustration. For centuries, railroads have been used in large canal construction, and the same goes here. We've been talking about a railway for 20 years now, but there's no need to build it in advance. Once we start digging the canal, it'll be implemented naturally. We will definitely lay a railway line within the canal corridor, because all the excavated soil will need to be hauled out by freight trains. That figure is outdated. I didn't finish explaining. I redid all the calculations after the interview with Sergei Slender aired. In addition to the various comments that followed, there were 3 excellent ones that pointed out an error.
So what's the final figure then?
The final figure came out to 100 billion. That includes the railway and the highway, which will also run along the banks of the canal. Both the railway and the highway will be built in parallel along the canal's edge. Can you imagine 100 billion? And now, when I tell you that I foresee revenue from the canal of no less than 56-58 billion per year, it means that in just 2 years, maximum, we will have recouped the entire construction cost. You know, of course, all these economic estimates.
Вы знаете, вот эти все экономические расчеты, конечно, делаются, как правило, большими.
Well, all these economic calculations are usually done by large teams, of course. Yes, certainly, that's a given. But I'm doing things about how kind of building in existing from these kind of cases any sickle place. And there are many issues that arise in the process, which are very difficult to take into account in your initial version. That's one point. Another point is the political component. We have to keep that in mind. As long as those savages exist in Yemen, the ones called the Houthis, starting anything related to construction, which would be highly vulnerable to attacks or shelling and so on, that's also probably a very complicated scenario.
Igor, since time immemorial, I remember from the very start of my seafaring career, there have always been pirates, and the response to them has always been inconsistent. Sometimes they were fought, sometimes not. Naval forces would be dispatched. Russia would send ships. France would send ships. The US would send corvettes. And they'd shoot back a bit. This kind of farce in the so-called developed democracies has long become tiresome, especially for seafarers. All of that should have been crushed in its infancy when the Malaysian pirates started shooting at and hijacking, well, the world's, shipping ships of global maritime trade. Pardon the wordplay.
Sorry, Malaysian or Somali?
Of course, Somali. What did I say?
Malaysian? I was surprised. I thought they're usually quite calm in that regard.
Да, сомалийцы было очень смешно, что они вот
Я не
действительно...
избалован эфирами, поэтому могу оговариваться.
Ничего страшного.
Right. And then there's this whole story with the Houthis. But for me, as a captain, it's just disgusting. It shouldn't even be a problem. There shouldn't be such a problem in the first place. I look around and see this miserable Egypt, this Al-Sisi. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? The only thing that brought decent revenue to your budget was the Suez Canal. So where is your expeditionary corps? Where is all the weaponry that was gifted to you? Where are your tanks, your aircraft? You should have just thrown the entire Egyptian army at it. I don't even know how to phrase it properly. Just smash them to pieces. That sounds about right. And yes, sure, either he or Egypt always has someone to sell weapons to for a fee, just as they conveniently ignore all those tunnels. We know that very well. Look, let's be clear. The political aspect is always there. But to sum it up, Egypt's foolishness is not a reason to reject our project and not build the shipping canal. All right, got it. And the whole Houthi thing, enough already. It's not even a real problem. We must build the canal and deal with everything else in parallel. While the canal is being built, we'll solve the Houthi issue. Right. And then there's this whole story with the Houthis. But for me, as a captain, it's just disgusting. It shouldn't even be a problem. There shouldn't be such...
Understood. All right, let's leave the Houthis alone. Tell me, this is something I'm personally curious about. During your time at sea, on the ships you commanded across oceans and seas, were there ever any pirate attacks?
God forbid. No, I simply never entered that region. No.
Then you're a lucky man.
However, there was one rather anecdotal incident. Traffic policeman once stopped me when I was driving from a ship docked in the port of Yeisk to St. Petersburg. I urgently needed to get back. I was trying to persuade him, please let me go, I don't have time. I'm a captain, the vessel's been left unattended and so on. And he says to me, Captain, I'll ask just one thing. What kind of weapon do you carry? But I didn't have any weapon at all. Well, in the Soviet Union, you understand, where would I even get a weapon? So I said, what? You're confusing me with the Americans. Here in the USSR, that's not how it's done. Maybe someone has one, but I never did. That's it.
Да, хорошо, ладно, оставим тогда гаишников и пиратов.
Yes, right. Well then, let's leave the traffic cops and pirates for now. Let's return to the project. As I understand it, inspired by this idea, and yes, it really does seem fantastic, not just economically, but in many other aspects as well. It's the kind of initiative the whole world should welcome. Although we both know how the world usually welcomes Israeli projects, we can guess. And not just guess, we know. But still, you tried, as you said, to knock on doors, to scientists who could do the calculations, provide expert assessments, and so on. That's the first question. And the second, You reached out to politicians whose decision might somehow move the idea forward. And you're saying that you spent 25 years trying to convince them, talking about it. At what stage are you now, and what's happening?
Вот сейчас вы остановились, и что происходит?
Well then, up to that point, all my efforts to reach out led nowhere. Literally in the first few months after I announced the existence of the project, I won't mention the name of the politician so as not to give him either publicity or bad press. I've long since lost respect for him, so I won't say his name. He was, at the time, very vocal in his support of the project. A journalist from Radio Reka actually called me from Jerusalem and said, "I'm at his office right now." This was the day before the Knesset elections. And she said, "Yura, can you imagine? In such a rush, he gave me 45 minutes. He literally flipped through your project. He said, 'This isn't a project, it's a bomb. It hits the target perfectly. As soon as the elections are over, I'll immediately get to work on it.'" That was in 2003. And after that, he avoided me for years. Even though I'm not as pushy as I might seem, I just occasionally tried to remind him, "Would you consider revisiting the project?" Once, I received a call from Chicago. It was Braverman calling, or maybe Braver. I think it was Mark Braver. He was the second in command at a major investment company. And he said, "Yuri, you ruined my lunch. I went to a friend's place with my wife, and he shoved my face into the computer and showed me your project, the project's website. He said, 'I'm your fan now.' He quickly told me a story about how he used to raise money for Israel, but was afraid to come because of the ongoing wars. There were wars going on here, and he had already been in leadership at that Chicago-based financial firm for 30 years. He said, 'Give me just one of your active politicians to talk to. I'll make a deal with him. We'll help. We'll help the Israeli government make it into the G20. We'll help you with everything. We'll pave the way for this project. Just give me one.' Can you believe it, Igor? I couldn't find even one. And back then, I actually had ties with politicians. I had acquaintances, activists, and others across different parties. Not a single one, you see. It's a kind of wonderland, you understand? A wonderland. But you know, even when we're not talking billions, but just seemingly millions, suddenly a whole host of questions and problems arise. Because what comes first is not necessarily feasibility or long-term benefit. Often the question becomes, where will we even find these millions? Who will believe in this? How effective will the return on investment be? Well, you understand, there are many questions. And then someone might try to make political capital out of it. And what if something goes wrong? A politician could ruin his own reputation just by wanting to help. Today, I won't judge our politicians so harshly anymore, because I finally have assistants now, and they're helping me a lot. I now have a woman on my team who is very well connected in many government offices, and she's already lined up meetings with at least 4 people. Today, I won't judge our politicians so harshly anymore, because I finally have assistants now, and they're helping me a lot. I now have a woman on my team who is very well connected in many government offices, and she's already lined up meetings with at least 4 people for me. The schedule for these meetings keeps getting pushed back, but it will happen in the coming month. I will be meeting with them. Yes, and I also want to thank a former minister. He is retired now, Amir Peretz, the man who once resolved Israel's defense issue against missile attacks. He signed the documents that gave us the Iron Dome. He deserves a monument in his lifetime for bringing the Iron Dome into existence. And this woman, she took me to him. This person, I forgot to mention him earlier, he looked at those 2 or 3 pages, of course. You don't bring your full set of calculations to a meeting like that. We brought a brief proposal, and he pointed with his finger exactly at the spot where the error was in the old calculations. And he said, "Yuri, when this part, the expenses goes down and the income goes up, I'll gladly meet with you again, and I'll even help you get into the right offices. I'll make calls, and I'll support you." So I can't say that today everything is cloudy and hopeless. Now there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And not just thanks to Mr. Peretz, so for now I won't make any predictions, so as not to jinx it. But people are starting to take interest, and I very much hope that someone from the American public will report this project to President Trump's office, a man I deeply respect and understand. No matter what anyone says about him, no matter the criticism, I feel like I can read him like an open book. I see exactly where he's heading. He's a strategist sent to us from above. People can say whatever they like about me, but I think in very similar categories. I'm sure that if Trump ever hears that such a project exists, this project will move forward. And what does this project mean? What I told you was only about the canal, just the passageway for ships. We will have a minimum of 320 ships passing through each day, because I've calculated it. That means a ship enters about every 3 minutes. You see, it's not so convenient for ships to overtake each other. It's a canal, after all. They have to move in an orderly line. And even so, our canal allows for nearly full-speed passage. But a ship every 3 minutes, that's more than enough not to overload the system. So I won't go spinning more numbers now. I already mentioned projected revenues in the range of $55 to $58 billion per year. But that's just a portion of the income. It's nothing compared to what else this project means. The canal will run for 250 kilometers through the Negev desert. As a result of nourishing the soil, the land will begin to absorb moisture, and it will start to bloom. That's one. Second, when all the world's goods are flowing through our country, don't you think we'll use our heads and make sure some of it stays here? We'll start signing contracts. Would you like to build a processing plant here? Why keep transporting your goods another 5,000 miles? Here, right here, we'll process them. Or you can process them yourselves. We'll lease you land. We'll participate in the production. We'll refine your products, your oil, your cotton, everything the cargo ships carry. We'll negotiate and offer excellent terms. We'll sign deals. Along the entire shoreline of our Israeli Navigable Canal, not only vegetation may appear, but also an industrial zone. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs. The revenue from that could equal, if not surpass, the revenue from the shipping traffic itself. As a result, you can confidently estimate this will bring about $100 billion per year in additional income. And what about water in the Negev? What's stopping us? We can install desalination plants. We can put up wind turbines with a vertical axis of rotation so they don't irritate people in America, including Trump and others, who complain that they spin and make noise. I'm proposing turbines with a vertical axis. They're even more sensitive to the wind. We can install solar panels. We have non-stop sunshine. Even in winter, we have sun. We'll desalinate the water. We'll irrigate the Negev. The surplus of desalinated water, under the supervision of scientists, can be discharged into the Dead Sea. For many, many years, we've been saying that the Dead Sea is drying up. It's evaporating. Hundreds of karst sinkholes have formed. And what are karst sinkholes? It's when moisture evaporates and underground voids begin to form. So just as those voids formed, we'll fill them. The water will seep in exactly where we choose, and it will fill the karst sinkholes and replenish the Dead Sea's reserves. All of this, of course, under scientific supervision. But this is fresh water, and we will have it in abundance. When has that ever been the case in Israel, to have an abundance of water? And now we will. I believe I haven't forgotten anything, though perhaps I did forget something. But you now have the general picture, don't you?
Yuri, well, as with any project, there are surely skeptics. Someone might listen to you and say, well, this gentleman presents everything beautifully, but something about it sounds familiar. Do you remember our classic novel, the one with, yes, Nu Vasyuki? You guessed it, Nu Vasyuki 2. So how do you respond to such skeptics? Surely you must have a concrete answer.
Of course I do. That's exactly what scientists are for. And more broadly, that's why every person has a head on their shoulders. Everyone needs to understand, even if it's seawater flowing, or rather, even if the canal is filled with seawater, I still assume that we'll install insulation. But even where it leaks, where it seeps through that insulation and penetrates 100, 200, 300 meters down, what does it pass through? through sand, through clay loam, through gravel, through various minerals. And it leaves behind all its suspended matter, including salt, in the upper layers, in the first dozens of meters. Beyond that, it goes deeper as water, mineral water. So when skeptics tell me, "You'll contaminate all of our underground freshwater reserves," I give them an example. I saw it a million times during my childhood in the Caucasus, how water intake filters are arranged in mountain rivers like the Kuban and others. There they installed a metal container buried in the riverbed, filled with stones, sand, clay, and so on. Underneath it, a suction pipe draws water for the entire village, town, or even city. And the water it delivers is not the murky, dirty, terrible water from the surface, but pure, clear water, like a baby's tear. All of those natural underground filters purify the water. And besides, my friends, I hope I've made my case that we are not damaging the environment. This is not a canal filled with oil or kerosene. It's a canal filled with water. I haven't even mentioned yet that this is 250 kilometers of newly created water surface, and it runs through the highlands of the Dead Sea. During the day, water evaporates. At night, that evaporation is trapped by the surrounding hills and has nowhere to go. It falls as precipitation. It has to behave that way, because it's sitting right there on the ridge, and the cloud, this evaporated water, so to speak, has nowhere else to go. It gets held in place. We don't have strong winds here that would blow it all away instantly. Our climate, to some extent, will also improve in a positive direction. Everywhere you look, there are only benefits. I understand. And as for the water, well, while we're digging, we'll discover a few things. I say this as a Jew. We'll find something in there, because we'll be cutting through 320 meters of elevation.
Дальше. Пока мы будем рыть, мы кое-что найдем. Это я уже говорю, как тот еврей. Мы кое-что там найдем, потому что мы будем убирать 320 метров высоты.
Ну, это понятно. Вот смотрите, с водой же, Юрий, с водой...
Well, that makes sense. But look, so much is tied to water. They say the next wars, which are already on the horizon, will be fought over water resources. They're already happening, though overshadowed by other conflicts we hear about daily. So in a way, you're solving not just an infrastructure issue, but the problem of war and peace itself.
Мы знаем, говорим в ежедневном режиме, а то будет, и вот вы таким образом вы решаете вроде проблему войны и мира, получается, тоже?
В том-то и дело, что этот проект, он глобальный. Он несет в себе глобальность. Этот проект, мало того, что...
That's exactly the point. This project is global. It carries global significance. Not only does it bring Israel tremendous income, I mean tremendous, but we will no longer have problems with pensions, or with religious groups, or with any kind of social programs. We'll have the funds for everything. And Jews know how to divide money. As long as there's a treasury, they'll figure it out. I hope this time it will all be done fairly. What else did I want to say? Look, besides all that, we are modern people. We have immense engineering knowledge. Just imagine a giant canal, and we need to hang bridges over it. I calculated that we'll need to build about 9 bridges. In some areas, we'll gradually increase in elevation as we dig the canal. Already on the eastern side near Gaza, the depth down to sea level will be around 30 meters. And the further we go, well, the deeper it gets. We're descending a full 320 meters in elevation. So it's descent, descent, descent. Can you imagine the kind of machinery needed to build bridges like that? But in my proposal, I say, let's not think of it that way. Let's build the bridges first, even before we start digging in that area. We already know the specifications for each location. We know the required support links. So we start with the bridge, it just rests on the ground. And then we dig the soil out from beneath it. When we reach canal depth, we also think about wildlife. We understand that not everything will travel over bridges, so we need to make tunnels. We'll build about 5 tunnels, some for wildlife to follow their traditional paths, and some for transport. And we'll do that too before we fill the canal with water, because we're digging dry. There will still be dams, a barrier at the Red Sea and another in the Ashkelon area. So once the canal is dug, we'll build the tunnels through dry land. I don't know if anyone's done it this way before, but I propose we do it all in advance. That drastically reduces costs. Do you now understand why the overall cost of the project has gone down? Because there are a lot of smart ideas here, if I may say so myself. Brilliant ideas we can implement. We have a sea of engineers. Capital will flow in from investors, along with the brain power those investors bring. And honestly, I'm not sure the state of Israel can build this on its own. This will be an international project. And if it's international, then decisions will be made collectively. So, tell me, am I convincing?
А раз международный, то и коллегиально решения все будут принимать.
Да,
я убедителен.
Да, звучит интересно. У меня такой вопрос. Ну вот, как касающийся...
Yes, it does sound interesting. I have a question, something related to the idea itself. When someone has such a concept, there's always the issue of copyright, intellectual ownership. So how do you personally view this as your child? What if it slips away and no one even remembers Yuri Dedov-Goldman afterward?
Вот сейчас говорю, чтобы все услышали, потому что каждый такой...
Let me say this now so that everyone hears it. Because every video recording like this is a kind of document. A document. And if I say something foolish now, that foolishness will come back to me later. So first, I truly hope for the decency of politicians. In the end, they are the ones who will make the decisions. It won't be the scientists. The scientists will only recommend. The decisions will be made by politicians. And as for their conscience, well, we all know. It varies. Now, what did I do from the very beginning? As soon as the text of this, let's say not a full-fledged project, but rather a memorandum, was ready, I sealed it and mailed it to myself as a registered letter. And I still have that sealed envelope. It's been recorded in the postal system's database. This was in 2001. Because I understood, if I tried to register it as a patent, well, what kind of patent can you get for a project like this? I'd need to maintain it, invest serious money into it, which I didn't have. So I made a clever move. The letter still lies there, sealed.
One more question. We know that among Jews, there's no shortage of bright, intelligent minds, just as there's no shortage of the opposite. Unintelligent, untalented ones, too. So tell me, please, in all the time the state has existed, I understand that sometimes economic questions fall by the wayside when one war ends and another begins. But still, there are unique achievements, especially in the technological field, and in many other areas too. So honestly, are you saying that no one else ever had this idea before? This bright, strategic idea that came to you?
There are already plenty of people who want to grab a piece of the glory. Publications are out there. One guy, for his sheer nerve, I banned everywhere I could. At first he was just a friend on Facebook, but then he started doing some shady things. Actually, no, this was even before Facebook, back in the days of the first radio forum, when all of this was just beginning, and I was writing there. And then suddenly this guy started claiming that he came up with the idea, that he had letters from ministers, that he had written to them. I banned him. Anyway, there are idiots, plenty of idiots. But I'm not talking about them. There are also serious people.
Есть и серьезные. Вот вы сейчас, если обратите внимание, в интернет переполнен рассказами и видеороликами про израильский судоходный канал под названием Бен-Гурион.
A navigable canal called the Ben Gurion? What a cheap, blatant lie. It's just... I asked my assistant, please, can you check if such a project ever even existed? Because, well, I made it up. I came up with it back in 2000. What kind of nonsense is this? And recently, I got myself a comrade. He's a scientist, an engineer. He's 92 years old, sharp as a tack. I've never met anyone like him. And suddenly he starts digging into this. He says, Yuri, can't you find out who's behind all this? And I answer, I just can't. I really can't. Then he gives me a lead, sends me a link. I go there, read the text. Watch the video on the site. It's through this guy that I found that very video. Yes, they're personal websites. The video has voiceover, by the way. Some guy in a mask, probably so that the audio doesn't match the image. But the visuals are stunning about how great Israel is, how it's had this project going for ages. In short, the politics there are so tightly intertwined with the economics. I thought, so who's really behind this? And then suddenly I read something, and I see the ears. You can guess whose, right? Turns out it's a site from some institute in Kyrgyzstan. I can't recall the name right now. And interestingly enough, this institute is apparently linked to the Russian Academy of Sciences, and China's too, and some third organization as well. And by the way, they're all CSTO members. I just smiled, closed the tab, and saved the link. So if anyone ever tells me it's not some shady office, I can pull it up and show them. Everything's clear, pure. So then, why are they doing this?
Я улыбнулся, закрыл и сохранил ссылку, что если кто-то мне будет говорить, что это не ГБшники, чтобы открыть и показать.
Понятно.
Чистой
Хорошо.
воды.
Я
Так вот,
понял.
почему они это делают? У нас еще есть минутка.
Ну, буквально, да.
Они это делают потому, что Россия сейчас как с тормозов сорвалась, пытаясь всем доказать, что Северный морской путь – это прекрасная альтернатива Суэцкому каналу. И опять они попали. Юрий Dedov-Goldman защищал свой...
Do we still have a minute? Just a quick one. Right now, Russia has gone off the rails, trying to prove to everyone that the Northern Sea route is a brilliant alternative to the Suez Canal. And once again, they've missed the mark. Yuri Goldman defended his thesis at the Institute of Water Transport in Leningrad in 1989 at the Department of Fleet Economics and Organization. The topic of the thesis was improving the efficiency of ferrying newly built ships from the Northwestern Basin to the Far Eastern Basin. And in that thesis, I left no stone unturned when it came to the Northern Sea route. I wrote back then that if you actually calculate the cost of transferring new vessels via the Northern Sea route, you'll realize something. After that transfer, not only do ships wait up to a year for the summer season and the formation of a caravan to pass through the route, but then they spend up to 3 years in repairs. They arrive without propellers, with hulls dented like an accordion. It's far more reasonable, after receiving the vessel from the shipyard, to simply send it independently on what we call a tramp voyage. That's a maritime term for when a ship takes cargo from port to port, guided by brokers, shipping agents, picking up incidental loads along the way. From port to port, and in about 3 months you reach the Far East. And along the way, you earn a ton of money, and the ship remains brand new. That was my thesis. And they've missed the mark. And in response to the fact that they're now flooding the internet with these silly videos and stories about the Ben Gurion Canal, now I have something to answer with. And here's something else. It turns out that there actually was a project for a navigable canal in Israel back in 1963. But that was a lock canal, which could never realistically compete with the Suez Canal. That's why it was buried and forgotten. And they stopped selling shares for it in America. They even planned to use 5 nuclear bombs, or maybe 50, who knows, to excavate the soil. Good thing I didn't know about any of this. The boy didn't know it was impossible, so he did it, and that's a good thing.
Here, I'll place this beautiful ship.
Красивый корабль, да?
Yes, this looks very much like the view our shipping canal will have. Take a look at what it could be like. Yes, 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 yes. This is in the Gulf of Islet. The terrain along the entire canal will look exactly like this.
А теперь...
All right, now I'll ask you to take just a few seconds, maybe half a minute, to say whatever you'd like to say specifically to those who will be listening to you in the United States.
Dear friends, I'm truly glad that by a twist of fate, I received such an education and earned my captaincy. I gave 27 years of my life to the fleet and also studied economics. I don't use my economic education as a professional economist, but it helps me calculate quickly and efficiently. And when expert assessments confirm that my calculations are correct, well, I've been lucky in that regard. What I really want is that if someone wants to argue with me, they do it with substance. They take a pencil and a calculator, do the math first, and only then speak. Because often in the comments, there are insults rather than constructive dialogue. I know that most people are absolutely reasonable. They dream of living in a good country. So please take a look at this side of the project. If we manage to push it through and launch it, Israel will become the richest country in the world per capita. We won't be jealous of countries that have oil, because this project will bring us such revenues that our small population of 9 million will more than thrive. We'll be able to work at jobs we love, get paid, and say, just put it in the account or something like that, easily. We will live beautifully. We will help all good nations. We will trade water, friends. In our climate, with our water shortage, we'll be selling water to our neighbors, or helping them with it, let's say. This project will give us a completely new life. And if not for us, then definitely for our children and grandchildren. That's why I ask you from the bottom of my heart, support me and spread the word about this project. And when I say support me, I don't mean me personally. There's already a group of us, 8 people so far, and we're growing. And ahead of us lie great achievements. I truly believe in this. The Lord didn't command us to the Holy Land for nothing. He said, Jews, there's nothing in this land, but you have your brains. Think, Jews. And that's where I'd like to stop.
Спасибо, Юрий.
Thank you, Yuri. Ladies and gentlemen, today we were joined by Yuri Goldman, former deep-sea captain, economist, and the author of the idea to build a shipping canal in Israel. As I understand it, the canal doesn't yet have a name, but if it does come to life, we'll eventually be able to guess whose name it might bear. For now, thank you for your time. Thank you for the interesting conversation. Let's hope for some engaging responses and perhaps new meetings in the future. All the best.
Интересные отклики тоже на него. И, может, на какие-то и новые встречи. Всего доброго.